the mountains of northern Greece fade into mist, where the hills of Macedonia meet the rugged lands of Illyria. This was the crossroads of two worlds, the civilized cities of the Greek south and the wild tribal kingdoms of the Balkans. It was here, in this borderland, that Alexander was born. The world remembers him as Alexander the Great, the Greek conqueror who crushed empires and spread Hellenic culture across continents. But before the legend, there was a young prince from a land that never quite fit neatly into the Greek world. The Macedonians spoke a dialect that many Greeks mocked as barbaric. Their customs were closer to those of the tribes to their north and west than to the philosophers of Athens. Macedonia, during the 4th century BCE, was a place where Greek influence blended with older, more primal traditions. Its kings claimed descent from Argos to affirm their Greekness, yet their neighbors saw them as outsiders. At the same time, Illyrian tribes like the Taulanti, Dardanians, and Enchelae lived just beyond the Macedonian border, raiding, trading, and sometimes marrying into noble Macedonian families. For centuries, the Macedonians and Illyrians had fought each other. Yet through war came familiarity. Cultures intertwined through captives, alliances, and frontier life. It was a melting pot of languages and gods, of mountain warriors and kings who ruled from fortified cities rather than marble temples. Alexander was born into this environment, a place where the distinction between Greek and barbarian was blurred by geography and necessity. His father, Philip II, spent his youth as a hostage in Thebes, learning Greek warfare. But he also spent much of his life fighting the Illyrians and marrying into their world. By the time Alexander came into the world, the Macedonian royal family stood at the intersection of both civilizations. They had Greek tutors and Illyrian enemies, Greek culture and Illyrian blood around them. The young prince's destiny was forged in that frontier tension between the orderly world of Greece and the untamed heart of the Balkans. It was not Athens, but Pella, that shaped him, a city that echoed with Greek words but stood surrounded by Illyrian hills. To understand Alexander's origins, one must look to his mother, Olympias. She was born in Epirus, a mountainous kingdom west of Macedonia, known for its fierce warriors, ancient rituals, and oracles older than those of Delphi. The Epirotes spoke Greek, but their traditions and tribal structure bore striking similarities to the Illyrians just beyond their borders. In fact, the Molossians, Olympia's own tribe, shared deep ancestral ties with the Illyrians. The line between them was more cultural than genetic. Olympias was no ordinary queen. She was fiery, spiritual, and steeped in ancient mystery. Legends said she danced with snakes during religious ceremonies and worshipped gods like Dionysus and Sabazios, deities of nature and ecstasy that had long been part of the Balkan spiritual world. These weren't the calm, polished gods of Athens. These were primal forces, wild and intoxicating. Her marriage to Philip II of Macedonia was both a political alliance and a fusion of cultures. Epirus and Macedonia were close kin, yet distinct. Through Olympias, Alexander inherited not just royal blood, but the fierce spirit of the tribes that lived between Greece and Illyria. Her people valued courage, loyalty, and divine destiny, ideas that would later define Alexander's life. Many historians have pointed out that Alexander's character, his impulsive bravery, his emotional depth, his obsession with divine lineage, seemed closer to the warrior kings of the north than to the philosophers of the south. His fiery temper and his sense of divine purpose may have come as much from Olympias's Molossian blood as from Philip's ambition. Epirus itself had long-standing connections with Illyria. For centuries, the Illyrian kings and Epirote tribes had traded, intermarried, and fought side by side. The border between them shifted constantly, and so did their identities. To the Greeks of Athens, they were both outsiders, northern barbarians. Yet within their lands, they saw themselves as heirs to ancient gods and mountain ancestors far older than Greece itself. So when Alexander was born, he was not just the child of Macedonia and Greece, he was the product of a wider Balkan world. His mother brought Illyrian Epirot blood, his father brought Macedonian might, and together they gave him something that transcended both. He would grow up to carry Greek culture across the known world. But in his veins, there flowed the restless energy of the mountains, Illyrian, Epirot, Macedonian, the essence of the untamed north. Before Alexander became the conqueror of Persia, he was forged in the rugged lands between Macedonia and Illyria. Those mountains and valleys weren't just borders, they were battlegrounds, where alliances were uncertain and survival demanded both steel and cunning. The Illyrians were not distant neighbours, they were constant adversaries, raiding Macedonian lands, testing their strength and shaping their warriors through endless conflict. Philip II, Alexander's father, knew this well. His early reign was defined by wars against Illyrian kings like Bardalus, one of the most powerful leaders in the region. Bardalus had once crushed Macedonian armies and even placed puppet rulers on their throne. But Philip's decisive victory over him re-established Macedonian dominance, and it left a mark on his young son. When Alexander was still a teenager, he joined his father in campaigns against Illyrian tribes. The battles were brutal, fought across steep passes and cold rivers. The Illyrians fought fiercely, their warriors moving with the terrain like shadows. It wasn't the orderly warfare of the Greek south. It was raw, unpredictable, and deeply personal. And it taught Alexander lessons no tutor could ever provide. After Philip's death, Illyrian tribes saw an opportunity. They believed the young king would be weak, easy prey for a rebellion. But Alexander responded with speed and fury. In 335 BCE, he marched north to crush the Illyrian uprising led by Clytus, son of Bardalus, near the town of Pelion. The battle was hard fought, his army surrounded, his retreat blocked, but Alexander's tactics turned near defeat into victory. He executed one of the most brilliant maneuvers of his early career, a feigned retreat that drew the Illyrians out, only for his cavalry to strike from behind. When the dust settled, Illyrian resistance was shattered, and their kings fled. Alexander didn't just win a war, he secured his northern frontier and earned the respect of the tribes who had once been Macedonia's greatest threat. Interestingly, after defeating them, he didn't destroy them. Instead, he made peace, welcoming Illyrian warriors into his ranks. When he later crossed into Asia, Illyrians marched beside Macedonians as brothers in arms. They became part of his empire, not its enemies. That bond between Alexander and the Illyrians, born out of blood and forged in battle, would last for generations. It hinted at something deeper, a shared spirit between Macedonia and Illyria, between the conqueror and those who first tested his strength. In the ancient world, identities were fluid, shaped more by alliances, geography, and shared traditions than by modern national borders. Macedonia, in Alexander's time, was a crossroads between the Hellenic south and the Illyrian west. Its people spoke Greek, yes, but their customs, warrior spirit, and tribal structures were far closer to their northern and western neighbours. Archaeology reveals that the highlands of Macedonia and Illyria were deeply intertwined. Artifacts, burial styles, and weapons found across the region often blur the line between the two cultures. The Illyrians were famous for their hill-fort settlements and bronze craftsmanship, and similar patterns appear in early Macedonian archaeology. Even the Macedonian nobility, those who considered themselves Greek, were surrounded by Illyrian influences in their daily life. And then there's the bloodline question. Philip II, Alexander's father, didn't just wage war against the Illyrians, he also formed bonds with them. Some accounts suggest that one of his wives, or concubines, may have been Illyrian, possibly of noble descent. If true, it would mean that Alexander himself carried Illyrian blood. Of course, ancient sources differ, some emphasizing his Greek heritage, others hinting at mixed lineage. But the possibility alone sparks debate to this day. Culturally, Alexander's temperament reflected both sides. From his Greek upbringing, he inherited philosophy, rhetoric, and the idea of divine destiny. But from the frontier life of Macedonia and its Illyrian borders, he learned resilience, discipline, and raw courage. The man who would lead armies across deserts and mountains wasn't shaped in marble halls. He was forged in a world of clans, raids, and mountain warriors. Even his leadership style bore traces of Illyrian influence. The Illyrians valued strength and charisma over birthright. Their kings were often chosen for their ability to lead men in battle, not simply for their blood. Alexander's charisma, his willingness to lead from the front, and his bond with his soldiers reflected that same ethos. So, was Alexander the Great Illyrian? Not entirely. But to say he was purely Greek would also be an oversimplification. He was something else, something born out of the meeting point between civilizations, a blend of Hellenic vision and Illyrian ferocity, a bridge between two worlds that defined the ancient Balkans. And perhaps that's why he was able to conquer so much of the known world. He was not bound by one identity, he embodied many. Today, the debate over Alexander's roots still stirs emotions across the Balkans. Greeks, Macedonians, and even some Albanians and Illyrian descendants each see a part of him in their story. And maybe that's the real answer. Alexander wasn't just one people's hero. He was born from a land where cultures met, clashed, and merged into something greater. His legacy reminds us that identity in the ancient world was never fixed. It was shaped by movement, by bloodlines that crossed borders, and by ideas that refused to stay in one place. Whether he was Illyrian, Greek, or something in between, Alexander's power came from that fusion, a reminder that greatness often begins where worlds collide.